Imagine the perfect exit. You've spent years, maybe decades, on this relentless drive, all the meticulous saving, all the late nights, all the spreadsheets, calculating that exact moment you could finally declare independence.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happens. The day arrives. Your net worth number hits the target, you sign the papers, and you walk out of that office for the very, very last time.
Yeah.
That first moment of freedom, that silence where all the stress used to be, it's just,
Sure.
it's intoxicating. It's pure euphoria.
It's the ultimate payoff, right? Is
Yeah.
the validation for all that hustle. We've seen this in the stories of high-level entrepreneurs, people like Jeff and Ryan who engineered these massive business exits.
Right.
And Jeff's description of it was so vivid. He said it was so weird to go from being, literally the center of attention, the guy whose phone never stopped ringing, the person everyone needed something from, and then you just sign the papers and walk away.
The immediate relief must be just immense. The physical stress just evaporates. You did it.
You did it.
But here's the huge critical blind spot in the entire FIRE journey. What happens 6 months later? What happens when the novelty of endless weekends wears off and that silence isn't just peaceful anymore, it's deafening?
Exactly.
So many people who are masters of the hustle, the corporate world, the entrepreneurial grind, they find themselves strangely adrift. They start experiencing something profoundly unexpected, a massive sense of loss.
This is what Ryan called his loss period. He really nailed it when he said that for the hyperachiever, your identity, your self-worth, it's all fundamentally rooted in metrics.
Mm-hmm.
How hard you worked, how many hours you put in, the complexity of the problems you were solving. And when that central engine of validation is just switched off, the void is immediate.
So what are you left with?
You're left with this unmet psychological need.
Mm-hmm.
You're almost desperately searching for the next intense activity, the next addiction, really, to replace that work addiction.
You've climbed the financial mountain, you've secured financial independence, but here is the critical, completely counterintuitive problem that so many people face in that first year. Why do successful early retirees feel like they've lost themselves once the professional structure is gone?
And that is the question that spreadsheets simply cannot answer. We dedicate so much energy to optimizing the net worth calculation, the 4% rule, the withdrawal rate.
All the numbers.
All the numbers. But we spend almost zero time on the psychological architecture you need to actually live a life after FI.
So today's podcast isn't about the index funds that got you to financial independence. This is the honest, the unvarnished rite of passage guide to surviving the shock of what happens after you quit. And we're focusing specifically on that turbulent first year. Welcome to Project FIRE.
Yeah, welcome.
We're going to provide a practical, empathetic guide to the emotional, roller coaster of that first post-FI year. And we're drawing lessons directly from those who've done it, who've successfully navigated this unexpected wilderness.
And we just want to be really clear with you. Financial security is only half the battle. I mean, it's a huge half, but it's only half. That first year requires specific psychological preparation because the core challenges are structural, they're emotional, and they're all identity-based.
Right.
You can have $10 million sitting in the bank and still feel completely adrift and lost because the currency of your self-worth has fundamentally changed.
Okay, so let's unpack that, this central trauma. We see early retirement as the ultimate victory, the ultimate prize. So why is the exit so often a profound source of emotional distress for the hyperachiever who, from the outside, looks like they had everything under control?
It really boils down to a fundamental loss of self-worth that was, for their entire career, externally supplied.
Externally supplied.
Yes, for executives, for high-performance employees, for entrepreneurs. Their job wasn't just a job. It was the core foundation of their identity. It was the narrative they used every single day to define themselves to the world, and more importantly, to themselves.
I mean, think about it. The first question you ask someone new is, so what do you do?
Exactly. That pressure to define ourselves by our output, it starts so early. We're just conditioned to believe that our value is directly proportional to our productivity and our professional status.
And if that's gone, your value is.
It feels like it's gone too. Ryan put this so perfectly. He admitted his internal measure of success was based directly on how hard he worked on something, like how many hours I put into something.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole psychological reward system, the dopamine hit from closing a big deal or hitting a tough deadline or getting praise from your boss, it was all linked to that effort. And when that primary source of worth just evaporates overnight, you're left with a vacuum.
And you're just scrambling. Where does the next sense of purpose or significance even come from?
Right. You're scrambling to find the next consuming activity, anything to replace that former intensity.
And it's not just the internal validation that disappears, is it?
Yeah.
There's also that immediate, and I'd imagine pretty jarring, social shock, the loss of external attention and status.
The shift is radical. Jeff, the entrepreneur we mentioned, described this feeling of going from the absolute center of attention, where he was constantly sought out, invited to exclusive events, the guy everyone relied on, to just finding the papers and walking away.
He called it the weirdest experience.
The weirdest experience. Because you go from being indispensable, the VIP in a major professional structure, to having zero demands on your time. And that is a major psychological jolt.
You lose your status.
You lose your status, you lose your internal network, and highly skilled workers, especially people who are in leadership roles, can suddenly feel like nobodies out in the broader world.
That transition sounds less like stepping off a platform and more like the floor is just pulled out from under you. If your job provided all the structure and all the status, then that fall must feel immense.
It is, and it's often experienced as a genuine grieving process. Psychologists who study this say that retirement often follows predictable emotional stages, and it's not always a smooth transition.
It's not just the party.
Not at all. There's the initial honeymoon phase, the euphoria, but that can quickly give way to a phase of stress, of disenchantment, and then a long period of adjustment. People can absolutely experience the classic stages of grief denial, sadness, anger, because they're struggling with what they've truly lost.
I think some people listening might struggle with that term grieving for quitting a job, even one they really liked. That sounds, a bit strong. What exactly are they grieving the loss of?
Well, they're grieving the loss of structure, for one,
Yeah.
of predictable social interaction,
Yeah.
of stimulating challenges. But most critically, they are grieving the loss of identity.
Okay.
If you spend 20 years building a very specific professional identity, even if you plan the exit meticulously, letting go of that established self is incredibly hard.
And it's worse if that was your only identity.
Oh, severely worse. If someone had what's called an obsessive passion for their work, meaning their professional life was the only area providing them with a sense of self-worth,
Yeah.
the loss could be severely traumatic. They find it almost impossible to let go of that professional role.
So what does that look like? Do they just keep checking their old work email?
Sometimes, yeah. Or they exhibit what looks like a rigid persistence to continue working, even when they absolutely do not need the money.
Yeah.
It's the identity they can't let go of.
So the job provides the foundation, the roof, the walls, the furniture of your identity. If that was the case for someone, how does that lack of, identity diversification make the post-DeFi transition even worse?
It creates acute pain. I mean, we talk about financial portfolio diversification all the time to mitigate risk, right?
Of course.
We need to talk about identity diversification for psychological resilience. If you only relied on one asset, your job, when that professional asset vanishes, your entire sense of self risks a total collapse. The people who navigate this successfully are those who already cultivated identities made up of multiple, strong, non-occupational roles.
Like what? A parent, a volunteer?
A parent, a dedicated artist, a weekend athlete, a mentor, something outside of their 9 to 5.
So the core takeaway here is that the goal isn't just financial independence. It's ensuring you have built identity independence before you quit.
Absolutely. You need to cultivate and test those non-job aspects of your identity while the work inertia is still strong. Because if you wait until the end, you're trying to build a new support structure in a total psychological vacuum.
And that's why the mental prep is just as critical as the net worth number.
It's everything.
Okay, that makes profound sense. But let's flip the script to the central paradox of freedom itself. You achieve this incredible state, unlimited time, infinite choice, your calendar is completely empty. But why does that very freedom so often lead not to elation, but to this crushing sense of paralysis and, in too many cases, a slide toward depression?
That is the cruel paradox of the early retirement fantasy. The thing you crave the most freedom from demands becomes the very thing that paralyzes you.
The ultimate fantasy is, waking up naturally, doing whatever you want, whenever you want. But the stark reality we've seen from early retirees is waking up late, scrolling aimlessly on your phone, doing nothing but watching TV, and feeling, in one person's words, bored out of my skull. Why is having absolute freedom so paralyzing for people who thrived under the structure of extreme pressure?
It's a combination of the void and the sheer cognitive load of the paralysis of too much choice. When you were working, momentum was automatic. The job provided structure, purpose, deadlines, a pathway.
Right.
It all just existed. Every single day was scheduled for you, whether you like that schedule or not.
Right.
When you retire, that automatic structure is gone. Daily activities don't just come looking for me like work did.
Mhm.
And this lack of external demand, it creates a vacuum that the mind really struggles to fill. And that leads quickly to unmotivation, feelings of irrelevance, and a real vulnerability to mental health struggles.
So you trade this rigid, maybe punishing calendar for a totally empty one, and suddenly the empty calendar is terrifying because you have to decide every single minute of every single day what to do next.
It is terrifying because that intense, action-oriented personality that drove your success in the first place, it needs a target. And if that energy doesn't have a structured outlet, it often turns inward and can manifest as anxiety or depression.
Wow.
We've seen reports that people who allow themselves to just float completely unplanned found those mini retirements or long breaks to be depression-inducing. The successful people who quit were used to being highly efficient agents of production, and now that agency has no anchor. It's just adrift.
So the countermeasure isn't to embrace total spontaneity, which seems so counterintuitive. It's the radical reintroduction of self-defined discipline and routine.
It is the single most successful strategy we've seen. You have to intentionally impose structure and discipline, but, and this is the crucial part, on your own terms.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, one retiree who overcame this crushing boredom found that the only way forward was to sit down the night before and plan the next day down to the half hour.
Down to the half hour. It sounds like work.
It does, but this intentional planning removes what he called the overwhelming decision fatigue that comes from having infinite options.
I love that idea. You're outsourcing your decision-making to yesterday's organized self. It sounds like a really efficient way to manage your psychological energy.
It absolutely is. You're automating your own momentum. Others implement really strict rules to ensure they keep moving forward.
Like what?
Like the powerful example of finishing all your business. So chores, errands, personal to-dos, exercise before noon. Every day.
Ah, I like that.
It forces you to get up, be productive, move your body, and get outside. The sources are just unanimous on this. Remaining indoors, doing nothing, being socially isolated, it is structurally destructive to your mental health post-FI.
Okay, so structure is the necessary framework. But what about the actual content? How do you fill that vessel with a sense of purpose that can truly replace the sheer gravitational pull of a 60-hour-a-week career?
The purpose has to be redefined,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to consciously accept it as your new job, even if it's unpaid and purely personal. Ryan, the entrepreneur, he recognized this.
Mm-hmm.
He consciously reframed his purpose and decided that his new job was simply, in his words, to make your life fucking awesome.
I love that.
It's great, right?
Yeah.
The purpose doesn't have to fit the traditional definition of a job, but the intention has to be there. This is the difference between aimlessly floating away from work and actively running towards a new, compelling endeavor.
I wonder, though, does this just replace one high-pressure grind with another self-imposed one? I mean, if you're planning your day down to the half hour, how is that really freedom?
That's a really important distinction. The key difference is the why. You're not driven by external necessity or corporate expectation or the fear of being unemployed anymore. You are driven by self-fulfillment.
And you can change it.
You have the freedom to change the schedule tomorrow or scrap the routine entirely for a week if you feel like it. It's structure at your command. This transition demands replacing the relentless drive of a career with intentional, measurable goals that you set for yourself.
So what does that intentional goal setting look like in practice for these early retirees?
It's about moving abstract desires into concrete action plans. We see a lot of success with list structures, like the someday, soon, and today lists.
Okay.
So someday is, the African safari. Today is researching flights and necessary vaccinations for Kenya. This process forces the goal, whether it's running a marathon or mastering the guitar, into concrete, actionable steps that provide that necessary sense of accomplishment.
What's really coming through is that this new purpose, it doesn't have to be some world-changing, Nobel Prize-winning thing. It just has to demand commitment and stimulating engagement from you.
Exactly. The people who found genuine post-FI happiness often pursued impact through deep volunteering or charitable projects, or they just threw themselves into mastering a complex hobby. Jeff, in particular, he emphasized that if he hadn't focused on passion projects and other interests, he said he probably would feel lost and like a total waste of space.
Wow.
Meaningful engagement is the antidote to the void. This could mean teaching, coaching, or even taking up some low-stress, part-time work that just feeds your intellectual curiosity without demanding financial output. It's about engagement over income.
That transition from structural reliance to intentional self-direction is the first massive hurdle. But achieving FI means you now have money and time. So what about the external pressure, especially that pervasive societal pressure to just fill your new free time with consumption and spending?
And that's where the discipline you learned over years and years of saving meets a powerful new psychological adversary.
We spent years dedicated to saving, cutting costs, embracing delayed gratification, meticulously building that nest egg. Now, the goal is freedom, and we have the capital. So what is the psychological trap of increasing consumption that just sneaks up on people post-FI?
This is the hedonic treadmill, or hedonic adaptation. And it doesn't stop just because you hit your FI number.
We usually talk about this financially, right? As your income rises, your desires just rise in lockstep.
Correct. The $500,000 salary doesn't make you permanently happier than the $100,000 one once you adjust your spending.
We constantly need more just to feel the same baseline level of satisfaction.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, apply that same principle to time and lifestyle. You have limitless free time, and that time needs filling. The urge is incredibly strong to avoid that mental void, the one left by the loss of structure, by buying stuff, or engaging in high-cost activities simply as a way to occupy the days.
So consumption is just a quick fix.
It's a very easy way to generate temporary, immediate, short-lived dopamine hits.
Even those who reached substantial fat fire status, like Ryan, admitted to having a significant monthly burn rate, $25,000 to $30,000 a month. Now, he has the capital, but that still requires a real awareness of where the money is going.
Absolutely. And Ryan's spending was rationalized. A big portion went to non-discretionary costs like housing for 2 properties, extensive budgets for family food and travel. But even with that wealth, the impulse to fill the voids with shopping and hobbies still accounted for several $1,000s a month.
Right.
The point is, the financial discipline you learned on the way to FEI has to continue. Not just out of fear of running out of money, but because you risk quickly adapting to a new lifestyle that provides no additional genuine fulfillment.
So how do you tactically resist this new pressure to spend, especially when you can technically afford the luxury SUV and the expensive new hobby equipment?
You need to understand the economics of your own psychological willpower. Studies suggest that our willpower budget is limited. It takes roughly the same amount of psychological energy to decide not to buy a massive $100,000 thing as it does to avoid buying a $5 latte every day.
So you have to use your willpower wisely.
Exactly.
Yep.
Use your limited psychological resources where they have the most impact on the big-ticket items. Focus your discipline on resisting the massive purchases and stop agonizing over every small, repetitive purchase.
That is fantastic practical advice. Prioritize your psychological resistance effort. But the most successful early retirees seem to tackle this by shifting the entire focus of consumption from acquisition to experience.
They execute a powerful pivot. They shift their focus away from acquiring material possessions and toward consciously creating meaningful, lasting experiences. Ryan noted that he intentionally uses his wealth to create unforgettable memories for his family. Taking them on trips to Antarctica, hosting these massive gatherings of 30 relatives, paying for specialized family lessons. These memories, they're the true legacy and the lasting source of value.
So it becomes less about demonstrating wealth through what you own and more about leveraging wealth to curate a life that's rich with shared memorable moments.
That is the pivot that breaks the hedonic treadmill. And Jeff made a really powerful observation about rejecting the traditional sadness of saving everything for the very end.
Oh, yeah.
He reflected, I can do anything. My body works great. I have awesome friends. How would my life be if I started to spend some of that now and didn't wait until the very end to try to enjoy it?
It's a great question.
It is. They recognize this unique window of health, energy, and freedom they have right now. It's an embrace of spending, but spending consciously on life-affirming experiences rather than just material things.
So before we dive into the social fallout, which is often the most painful part of this whole transition, let's just quickly acknowledge the importance of building this community at Project Fire. If you found these lessons on navigating the emotional side of financial independence helpful, from managing the identity void to building a new social structure, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to provide this in-depth tactical analysis for our community.
Yeah, and hit that bell icon to make sure you don't miss our next deep dive.
Okay, so onto the relationship challenge. You've achieved ultimate personal freedom, but suddenly the people you spent 40 or 50 hours a week with are just gone. They're still showing up to the office, you aren't. We have to talk about the inevitable. What is the fundamental structural reason that proximity-based work friendships vanish so quickly and completely after you retire?
It's because these friendships were, in many cases, situational alliances. They were built on convenience and shared stress, not necessarily deep personal compatibility.
Wow, situational alliances. That's a brutal way to put it.
It is, but it's often true. Social science tells us that friendship relies on the strength of what they call the four pillars: proximity, frequency, commonality, and shared secrets, or vulnerability.
Okay.
When you retire, the job structure simultaneously collapses multiple of those pillars. You lose the daily proximity and the frequency, and you instantly lose the commonality of the shared corporate culture, the projects, the stress about the boss.
The structural supports for the entire relationship are just gone.
Exactly. And retirees quickly feel the deep loss of that ready-made community. Jeff noted that he was no longer invited to those same dinners and groups that other business owners and entrepreneurs go to.
Mm.
When you step down from being a key player in your professional circle, you instantly lose the associated status and the community recognition. This is why highly accomplished people can quickly feel like strangers outside their former domain.
And beyond the logistical collapse of the friendship, there's the emotional rift, the thing you call the relatability gap.
And this is often the most painful and unexpected social fallout. The retiree's life just diverges so radically and immediately from the working friend's life.
How so?
When the early retiree discusses their slow mornings or their passion projects or the freedom of infinite time, the working friend, who's still battling gridlock traffic, office politics, mortgages, childcare logistics, they hear a subtle criticism of the life they chose or the life they're currently stuck in.
So just by existing in your new state of freedom, you inadvertently force your working friends to confront their own life choices and their own insecurities.
That is the tragic, brutal truth of early retirement social dynamics. The retiree's success, whether it's through a massive exit or meticulous saving, it lives out this potent what-if scenario that their working friends didn't choose or maybe don't believe is even attainable for themselves.
And that creates fertile soil for envy.
Fertile soil for envy and resentment to take root, even among really close friends.
Envy is such a powerful emotion and one we rarely ever acknowledge in polite conversation, especially when we're talking about our friends.
It's a base human reaction, though, and if it's left unchecked, it can quickly end even the best of friendships. If a friend is having non-stop financial struggles, it becomes psychologically exhausting for them to maintain a positive, authentic relationship with someone who retired in their 30s or 40s.
So they might seem supportive on the outside.
Outwardly, they appear supportive, but secretly they might harbor resentment, and that unspoken resentment just creates distance. The transition essentially becomes a painful, structural friends cleanse, and it's often initiated unintentionally by the friends who are still working.
Wow. And beyond the loss of those relationships, you mentioned there's another clear danger zone, having your new, valuable free time exploited.
This is a critical boundary issue that takes so many early retirees by surprise. Because your time is no longer dictated by a company calendar, your friends and family often assume your time is worthless and infinitely available.
Right, you're not doing anything.
Exactly. They believe they can utilize your time to make their own lives easier. And suddenly, you become the default full-time airport shuttle, the free handyman, or the perennial errand runner for everyone else.
You worked so hard for so long to regain control of your time, only to have it completely absorbed by the demands and schedules of other people.
Exactly. So learning the ability to set firm, polite boundaries and knowing how to say no becomes an absolutely necessary skill to protect the precious time you work so hard to gain.
You spent years learning to set boundaries at work. Now you have to do it in your personal life.
Without feeling guilty or appearing arrogant about your new freedom, it's a tough balance.
So if your old social circle disappears because of this collapse of structure and the relatability gap, how exactly do you go about forging new meaningful connections as a financially independent adult? Especially when most structured social activities seem geared toward either the very young or the traditionally retired, the 65-plus crowd.
That requires deep intentionality and a proactive, almost surgical approach to building a new community.
We need practical, actionable solutions for overcoming this intense isolation. If the old work friendships were situational, where do we find the new friends who align with our flexible post-FI lifestyle?
You have to approach this like a project. You have to recognize that enduring friendships are built around doing things together, not just passively hanging out. For a stranger to become a friend, you need that repetition, that proximity, and that common goal.
So what are the most effective avenues for these activity-based connections, especially for people in their 30s and 40s?
You have to think non-traditional hobby groups that demand frequency. People have found significant success joining structured classes like advanced cooking or local community bands, music groups.
Guitar pickers groups I saw.
Yeah, guitar pickers groups, cycling clubs, or interest-specific meetup.com groups that are focused on intellectual topics or community building. One retiree realized that since he was bored, he needed to, in his words, throw everything against the wall. Art, learning, socials, until something stuck.
The activity itself provides the shared structure.
It provides the shared structure, and it ensures you meet that required pillar of frequency.
So you have to consciously engineer the structural conditions that work used to provide for you. But this time, it's centered around joy and mutual interest instead of corporate necessity.
That's the key insight. And another highly successful strategy for early retirees is recognizing and leveraging their location flexibility.
What do you mean?
If you live in a traditional suburb where everyone your age is working 9 to 5, your social isolation is structurally guaranteed. You may need to consider relocating to a place where people naturally have more schedule flexibility.
Like where? A big city.
Certain major metropolitan centers with active community groups, or communities that are centered around leisure or hobbies, or even the digital nomad life.
And what about the demographic constraints? If you're 35, how do you find peers when most people in that age bracket are still climbing the corporate ladder?
Well, early retirement actually opens the door to building these richly diverse, intergenerational friendships. You're no longer limited to peers from your specific career cohort.
I like that.
You can find incredibly rewarding relationships with older, traditionally retired people who have deep life experience or younger people through charitable work or structured mentorship opportunities. This diversity can significantly enrich your worldview, but it requires being proactively open to connections outside your typical age bracket.
Okay, let's finalize the advice on the money front. Even with massive wealth, we heard that financial anxiety remains. How can we minimize market-induced stress and that omnipresent fear of running out of money, especially when the market news is constantly screaming doom?
The overarching strategy is radical, almost painful simplicity in your investment structure. High net worth retirees, even those who successfully manage complicated businesses, caution strongly against overcomplicating their personal investments once they exit.
They warn specifically against chasing that sexy 20% IRR in private equity or crypto, right?
Absolutely. One retiree noted that investing in too much different stuff caused an extreme amount of anxiety to administer those when it's doing tax returns. The complexity and the administrative burden just completely offset any perceived gain.
So the advice is?
The consensus advice is to keep it profoundly boring. Concentrate your money in simple, broad market index funds or ETFs, S&P 500, VTI. This reduces complexity. It minimizes the psychological burden of constant monitoring, and it simplifies the administrative effort dramatically.
And specifically for covering the burn rate, that monthly spending, what provides the maximum psychological comfort?
Using a comfortable conservative distribution model with a deliberate buffer. Ryan, for example, aimed for a mid-3% after-tax return on his fixed income portion to conservatively cover his monthly expenses.
So he's not relying on the stock market for his daily needs.
Exactly. By relying on a secure, lower-risk income stream to cover his essential burn rate, he gains a massive psychological cushion against the daily market volatility that's affecting the rest of his portfolio. He felt good having a cushion, he recognized the math of the 3% rule, and he avoided the anxiety of relying on high-volatility assets for daily necessities.
That sounds like a powerful way to decouple your emotional state from the daily ticker tape.
It is essential. And finally, the ultimate piece of advice to reduce the crushing pressure on this massive life decision is this. Do not treat financial independence as a fixed, permanent, immutable destiny.
What does that flexibility look like in practice?
It means maintaining an open mindset toward future work, but strictly on your own terms. Both Ryan and Jeff remain completely open to future work if something truly interesting or impactful comes along. But they would be driven by curiosity or purpose, not by necessity.
So that flexibility just dramatically reduces the enormous, paralyzing pressure to make sure the retirement decision is 100% correct and permanent.
Totally. If something interests them later, they can pursue it without guilt or the need for a massive paycheck.
And let's just reiterate Jeff's powerful instruction. Embrace spending now. Reject the sadness of saving everything for age 70.
Prioritize using your wealth now to maximize experiences and memories during this unique window of health and freedom. Jeff even mused about the exercise of consciously spending down a portion of wealth while still maintaining a comfortable backstop of, say, $10 million, just to consciously reject that lifetime habit of hoarding.
The true value of early retirement is having the courage and the intentionality to enjoy it while your health and your energy are at their peak.
The first year of financial independence is the victory lap, but it is very quickly followed by the wilderness, a difficult, challenging adjustment phase that validates the years of hard work, but demands a total redefinition of yourself.
The key takeaway is intentionality. The shift demands that you proactively build structure where the job once stood, that you resist the powerful temptation of consumption to fill the void, and that you actively nurture a new social network that's based on shared interests rather than shared cubicles.
Right. You have to ensure the positive, forward-looking worldview you cultivated while you were working carries over into your freedom. Otherwise, the pessimism and anxiety will follow you right through the exit door.
You worked so hard for so many years to gain this freedom in this time. Don't let that very freedom paralyze you into depression or boredom. The inertia of your old lifestyle, built on hustle and corporate structure, is incredibly strong, but you now have the power to live intentionally, unbound by external demands.
And that raises an important question for everyone who achieves this goal. When the noise of work finally stops and you finally have the choice to do anything at all, what will you do to prove to yourself that your life is not empty? That is the real essential work that starts the day after you quit.